to the second part and the final part of our series, Like a Boss. In our last episode, we talked about how life is better when you honor your boss. And I know maybe some of you are still thinking about that, or when you were listening to it, you thought about, well, yeah, that's great and all, but you don't know what my boss is like. You don't know who is in charge of me, the authority. They are blank. Either they could be lazy, irresponsible, maybe disrespectful, plain wrong. And then you're asking, well, now what? Then what? And I told you we would talk about that, so we're going to start talking about it today. A couple questions to ask are we called to be good or bad leaders? Does God actually want me or you to follow a leader who is bad or isn't doing what God has been saying to them? Am I called to be a good follower to someone, to an authority figure that is just not good? Or maybe more specifically, you're asking, can I be disrespectful of that person? Can I talk behind their back because they're just that bad and they deserve it? Can I protect myself against people who are doing a bad job so I look better? These are really good questions, and they're honest questions, which is great, because honesty is one of the best things that we have. Honesty also helps us get to the heart of what is really stopping us from doing that one thing or saying this thing or that thing. Dealing with authority figures who don't live up to the expectations or the responsibilities that they're supposed to is probably one of the worst and hardest things to deal with throughout life, as far as I'm aware. And I think the fact is that's because we're always going to have someone who has authority over us, no matter where we are in life. And although this is complicated, it's good to know that God has given us a starting point for how to be a good follower, even when we have a bad leader. Today we're going to be looking at a passage in the New Testament written by a guy named Paul. Now, for those of you that don't know, Paul is probably one of the most famous Christians, besides Jesus, that we know today. Paul is responsible for writing a multitude of books within the New Testament. Most of them are letters to different churches, all of which have different issues that are going on within that church. And Paul is writing to them to specifically talk about these separate issues. The one we're going to be talking about today is a letter that Paul wrote to the people living in Colossae. I don't know if I said that right, but that's what I'm going with. Anyways, the book is called Colossians. And in this book, Paul is giving a lot of instruction about leadership, about how to be good followers, how to be good leaders, but ultimately what to do when you are a good leader or a good follower, but don't have a good leader. It's important to know that in this particular time period, the Christians are still being persecuted day in and day out and have been subjected to terrible crimes, terrible punishments, and terrible acts. And within all of this, they are trying to be good followers to a Roman society that is really trying to destroy them. It's important to know that Paul loved and cared for each and every one of his churches that he talked to and wrote letters to. Paul risked his life on many different occasions just to write to churches, to start new ones, and to spread the gospel to others. So we can take a pretty good comfort. We can take a really good trust that Paul, whatever Paul is writing about, has a very specific and meaningful purpose, because he wouldn't be risking his life otherwise for it. So the passage we're going to be talking about is in Colossians. Like I said, it's going to be Colossians chapter 3, and it's going to be verse 23. So we're going to read that real quick. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Right out of the gate, Paul is taking a swing at authority, telling us and telling the church back then that you need to respect the authority enough to do the work and do it well. No matter what it is, you need to do it. Do it with all your heart, as if they were working for the Lord. In other words, no matter how bad it gets or how good it is, do it with all of your heart, with everything you've got. Because what you should be doing is picturing you working for God. You need to picture that God is your ultimate authority, which he is. But we just don't see that sometimes, especially when it's a bad leader. Now you may be thinking, this sounds nice, but what if they make fun of me? What if they are mean to me? What if they go from a bad leader to a worse leader? What if they single you out in a bad way? According to Paul, this isn't a they situation. It's not about they. It's about God and you. Your part is to obey him and work hard, is to obey God and work hard, but not just to work hard. You're supposed to work hard with all of your heart. So going above and beyond. Coaches would always tell me they wanted 110%, which I thought was ridiculous because 100% is a whole lot and 110 is probably not possible. But it's the same concept. God wants you to work with 110%. Throw everything you have into working hard. Also think about this. You're doing it for God, not for others. That should be a huge motivation to you. While you are doing your part, remember, God is doing his part. Paul continues on his letter. We're going to read the next two verses. So remember, it's Colossians chapter 3, and this time we're reading 24 and 25. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. Now, if you don't know, an inheritance is something that you get at the end of your parents' lifetime. All right, so back then it was very much about giving away the family land and the property that was going on, that they had at that time, giving all that they owned to someone else, to the next in line. Yet even in today's and the culture back then, this is kind of confusing because Paul is talking, remember we're talking about authority here, and that's not like your parents. I mean, your parents are part of that, yeah, so maybe that fits in there. But think about like with your boss at work. If your boss passes away, I doubt you're going to get anything out of it. maybe a break, but I mean, other than that, not very much. So Paul here is trying to tell you that, hey, don't worry about this part. Don't worry about the person in front of you. Remember that you're going to get inheritance something from God. That's God's responsibility. God is going to give you that stuff because you're working hard with all of your heart, working as if He, God, was your authority. Another way to put it is that your future, your opportunities, your new jobs, your future jobs, your future family, your future self, all of these things are part of God's responsibility. And God does that to take care of you. But I don't know if you caught that last part. Let me read it again. Verse 25. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. Yes, God is focusing on you and making sure that you have the inheritance that you deserve. But God is also taking care of the they, taking care of those who do wrong. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid with wrong. By who, you're asking? Well, by God. You have a bad boss, bad coach, teacher, parent. Don't worry. God will handle it. Now, He may not handle it the way that you want Him to handle it. Let's get that very clear. What you think is best and what God knows is best is very different. And I hate to break it to you, but 100% of the time, God is right. You may think you're right, but God is right. So following a bad leader starts with this. Do your part and trust that God with the rest. Maybe another way to put it is this way. Control what you can control and trust God with what you can't. Let me say that again. Control what you can control, because there are things you can control. But with whatever you can't control, trust God with that. You're not going to escape the problem by just saying, oh, well, God's got it. I have nothing I can do. That's wrong. God is not giving you or me or anyone a free pass to do whatever they want. That's not how this works. Let me make that very clear. Let's look at another passage. This time we're looking at the book of Acts. Now, if you don't know, Acts is really a history of what happened after Jesus rose. What happened to the apostles? What happened to the disciples? And how did the church grow? So in this passage, we are going to be looking at Peter and John. Now, these are two of Jesus's original disciples, and what we see them doing is they are preaching the good news of Jesus. And they have just gotten arrested by the officials and were told not to say anything, not to say another word about Jesus. By the way, these leaders were the leaders of their country. In other words, Peter and John are preaching the word of God, and the leaders and authority of their country, the big guns, are telling Peter and John to directly disobey Jesus, who told them to spread the gospel. So here we see two young guys, Peter and John, who are terrified. I mean, at least I would be. I don't know if they were, but I have to feel at least maybe a little bit. And they're in front of these officials, all right? So they're wondering what to do with them, right? These officials are like, all right, we got these two hoodlums, I don't know, and they're like, all right, we got to do something with them because they're causing a ruckus. Now, this next part is really interesting because we see Peter, who I might want to remind you, just a little bit ago denied ever knowing Jesus. Not once, oh no, not twice, yes, 3 times. This is what Peter has to say. We're going to go to Acts chapter 4, verse 19 and 20. But Peter and John replied, "Which is right in God's eyes, to listen to you or to him? You be the judge. As for us, we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard." In other words, maybe I can put a little bit of a paraphrasing on this and say this. Sorry, boss, no can do. Jesus has made it very clear and told us to talk about what has happened to him and what he was sent on this earth to do. And you just told us not to. We've made our decision as to who to follow. You or God. We're following God. And maybe you're thinking, well, hang on here. What were we just talking about just a little bit ago? We just said that we don't want to disobey authority, yet clearly they are. And I would agree with you. The short answer to that would be yes. But, and yes, there is a but, we need to understand that there is, and there may be times when the right thing to do is to respectfully, humbly, and compassionately defy an authority figure in your life because they lead you against what's right or wise. In other words, there will be times where you can honor your boss, but not obey them. But those times are very few in between. Figuring out how to navigate these tricky situations is something that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and is very difficult to do. But here's where people around you can step in and help. Talk to a friend. Talk to a leader, someone you trust. Talk to an adult. Explain the situation and ask them not what do I do, but how do I humbly and compassionately deny or disobey what my boss is asking me to do. For those of you that live in a reality of having an authority figure that is not the greatest, maybe is a bad leader, I want to say I'm sorry. But I want to give you 3 things, 3 practical steps that you can do moving forward to negate this bad leadership. Number 1, forgive. We're all human. We all make mistakes. We all have sin within us. So, forgive them of what they've done wrong. They may not even know that they're doing it wrong. Number 2, be respectful. I don't know one situation where being irresponsible or disrespectful has ever come to a good outcome. Pretty much all of the times that happens, it's a terrible outcome, or at least very, very not good. Number 3, lead up. If that adult or leader is not acting like one, somebody's got to act like one. Why not you? Step up. Lead up. If you do your part and you trust that God will do his part, which he will, then we have all of the things that we need to be like a boss.